So I'd also like to acknowledge that we are each participating remotely from diverse traditional territories. Durham College is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Anishinaabe Nation, which also includes Algonquin, Chippewa, Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, and that is the land from which I am also joining you virtually. And it's through the treaty process that we're able to live, learn, teach, and prosper in this region. So here at Durham College, we'd like to acknowledge with gratitude this land and the Indigenous peoples who have cared for it, stewarded it, and protected Turtle Island, or North America, and its resources. We commit to the responsibility of reconciliation, and we do this quite actively in the journalism program, I would like to point out. And it's really important to us that we increase awareness and understanding of our shared histories with the people who have stewarded this land and continue to live here. And we do this by recognizing the past and also working towards a shared future as friends and allies. If you're unsure of the history and significance of the lands upon which you find yourself today, I encourage you to make time to find out, and I invite everyone to find their own way to reflect upon and give thanks to the First Peoples of your communities. At Durham College, a great way to do this is to visit the First Peoples Indigenous Center in the Center for Collaborative Education. I'd also like to set the tone for today's event with a gentle reminder to everyone that we're here to learn and to engage with one another from a place of respect and kindness. Disrespectful or abusive language or behavior, which I do not anticipate at all, but I just want to let you know that it won't be tolerated. And I want to affirm our participation in today's event as an opportunity to listen and to think critically about the knowledge and information being exchanged from our very accomplished speaker. And I want us all to remember that while we don't have to agree with each other, we must always recognize and honor each other's humanity. And for this reason, anyone who makes insensitive or disrespectful comments verbally or in the chat function will be removed from the session. But as I mentioned, I do not imagine that will happen. I do want to mention, however, that the session might contain sensitive content, possibly a trigger for you personally. If you feel triggered or distressed by anything you hear, please exit the session, follow up with the campus health center at the campus, and feel free to tell one of our committee members after the session is over. So once again, welcome. Before we begin today's session, I wanted to let you know about another event that's happening today. Social Justice Week coincides with News Literacy Week, and you're invited to join DC journalism students and librarian Trish Johns-Wilson, who's here virtually with us today, at the library for a session at 1 p.m. called Fact or Fiction, Shining Light on News Resources in a World of Information Overload. So that's today in the Library Instructional Lab on campus. And the session will explore how you can tell misinformation from real news in news feeds, social media posts, artificial intelligence, and traditional news sources. So I've dropped this in the chat, and also you'll notice Trish Johns-Wilson there if you want to message her privately in the chat to get more information. So at this point in time, I'm almost done all the announcements. We would like to acknowledge our two sponsors for the event, Durham's RISE initiative, out of our EDI office, and the Durham College Student Association. So I believe there's somebody here from RISE who will provide a snapshot of what RISE is and what they do. May I give the floor over?
Yes,
Welcome.
Teresa. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm Seni. I'm the current Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisor, and I'm very excited to share that our office actively supports this event to fostering an inclusive environment in the Social Justice Week to embark a journey of awareness and actions for positive change. So let's talk a little bit about RISE, the program who is supporting this event. RISE stands for Reach, Include, Support, and Elevate. All in all, what RISE is a dedicated initiative aimed at supporting students from underrepresented groups across three core pillars to successfully access and pursue post-secondary education. So the first pillar is focused on outreach, aiming to empower students by demonstrating that post-secondary education is a viable and attainable option. The second pillar is access and transition, centers on facilitating successful academic and social transition for enrolled students at Durham College. This involves offering service navigation to a variety of support services available on campus. And the third pillar is retention. Emphasize ongoing support for students from underrepresented population again to ensure they have the necessary community and assistance to reach their full potential and achieve their education and career-oriented goals. This equal opportunity exists for all Ontario residents for an equity deserving group to pursue a post-secondary education. When we say the equity deserving group, we're talking about a student with disabilities, first-generation students, racialized students, indigenous, newcomers, LGBTQ, low income, and more. So thank you for listening about this program, and please enjoy the session.
Thank you so much, Sunny. So I also just wanted to mention at the end of the session, we do have a survey. I've put the link in the chat. So thank you in advance for filling that out. So the Social Justice Week Committee and Durham College are happy you're joining us for this seminar, and we seek to strive to serve our students and community by addressing social justice issues that are prevalent today. With that in mind, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Alvin Ntibinyane. Alvin joined Durham College last year as a professor in the journalism mass media program, but he launched his career as a reporter in 2004 at the Botswana Guardian and Midweek Sun newspapers, where he covered every kind of news there is, from politics, sports, and entertainment to courts, crime, and city council meetings. By 2011, his hard work landed him the role of bureau chief, where he continued to write and edit while mentoring a team of junior reporters. And our junior reporters in the newsroom here at Durham College, you can see in the Chronicle there, are now benefiting from this and from all of Alvin's teachings. So Alvin was had a fellowship in South Africa at the Center for Investigative Journalism, which was followed up by a stint as editor of the largest privately owned newspaper in Botswana. In 2015, he founded the Inc. Center for Investigative Journalism, a nonprofit organization that trains journalists and advocates for the rights of investigative reporters. He came to Canada to pursue his master's degree in journalism and studied at the University of Regina, where incidentally, our professor Danielle Harder in the newsroom also studied. And after graduation, Alvin stayed on at the school as a sessional instructor until last year when we asked him to come and join us at Durham College. So this year, Alvin is the writer in residence for the Journalism Creative Writing Program, which is a collaborative program with Trent University Durham and Durham College. We're so pleased to have you presenting today, Alvin, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Teresa. Yeah, so I joined in 2022, which is almost 2 years ago. Yeah. Okay. So whenever I'm asked to speak at an event, I always want to start with something that will sort of give you a more comprehensive identity of who I am. You can call it a poem if you want. I don't know what I should call it really, but let me start. So my identity is complex and multi-phased. I'm Black, and my skin is contested. It's a contested aspect of my identity. I'm an African. I come from people who were previously colonized by forces beyond. I'm a grandson of a World War II veteran who traversed the seas and the ocean to fight Nazism and to return home to die a poor man, exploited. I'm a privileged heterosexual male who has achieved some success because the system is made for me. Yet I'm a Black person, a victim of colonization, racism, systemic racism, everyday racism, and all that. I'm an immigrant with a heavy African accent, and my voice reflects who I am and where I come from. I'm also a starter. I punctuate my sentences with stops, starts, and reputations that speaks as loudly as my words. I'm also a settler in the land that was steered by indigenous people for centuries. I'm a journalist, and I've used ink to paint vivid pictures of the world as I see it. I'm also a professor, an acquired position of privilege and class. I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a Christian, I'm a friend, I'm a colleague. Lastly, I'm a student of social justice, seeking to understand the complexities of oppression in pursuit of equity, change, and social justice. Yes, my identity is intersecting and interlocking. It's like a puzzle that comes together piece by piece, a puzzle of experiences, histories, beliefs, successes, failures, and contradictions. So on that note, let me start by thanking everyone who is here. I want to thank the organizers of this event and say it is always important to pause and talk about issues of social justice. When I was asked to speak on this session, on this occasion, about 9 or 10 months ago, I struggled, to decide what I should talk about. Many ideas came into mind. I think Jason, if he's here, will remember that I initially submitted a list of about 3 topics. At first, I wanted to discuss the investigative work I've done in journalism that touches on social justice. I also considered something very experimental, such as the 7 grandfather teachings, trying to apply them to social justice and trying to see whether they can strengthen journalism's focus on social justice. I also thought about sharing the unpublished work that I am currently and privately engaged in. However, upon reflection and thought, I have decided to settle for something that I think I'm more comfortable with. So my presentation today will be on the intersection between journalism and social justice, the intersection between journalism and social justice. In that way, my presentation will be in the form of a question. It will be in the form of a question: what can journalism do to promote social justice and fight oppression? What can journalism do to promote social justice and oppression? But I want to start first with a series of rhetorical questions. One, is there oppression in the world we live in? Is there oppression in the systems and institutions that guide and shape our lives? Is there oppression in our social structures? Are there individuals and communities and societies that live under oppression today? Are there nations that live under oppressions today? Well, let me also say this. Oppression, in my view, and I'm sure most of you here will understand and will agree with me, oppression is a reality. It is not an abstract concept. It is something that is not imagined. It is something that is real to many people, to many communities, to many societies, to many individuals, to many nations. And I want to say this, that as long as there are human beings on this planet, we will always have some elements of oppression. Most of us here have one way or the other experienced or witnessed forms of oppression. Many of you here are currently experiencing the impact of systemic inequalities that permeates our societies. As a power dynamic, oppression is deeply intertwined with the structures and systems that govern our societies. Oppression, again, let me also add this, is not a historical anecdote, but it is a present-day reality. It manifests in various forms. It could be racism, sexism, classism, ableism, it could be economic, political, cultural, to name a few. The question we have before us today is, how can journalism now promote social justice and oppression? But I think before answering this question, I want to mention 2 things here, 2 things. First, I'm approaching this with the idea that journalism is a public good that should serve the interests of the society at large, not just a select few. And as a public good, journalism has the power and responsibility to inform, to educate, to investigate, and to mobilize the public towards a greater awareness and action in the pursuit of social justice. Secondly, it is very important to recognize and acknowledge that journalism itself operates within the very structures and power and also inequality it seeks to critique. So journalism as such, as much as it's a public good, it is not a perfect institution. So I'm not coming here to say that journalism is a perfect institution. It's not. It has its own flaws. We'll talk about this later. And I thought I should clarify this from the onset. Now, to my question. What can journalism now do to fight social justice, to promote social justice and fight oppression, within our communities, within our societies, within our nations and all that. So when preparing for this presentation, I wondered how I could answer this question in a simple, logical, and very understandable way. So I shopped around for a concept or for a framework that will help me deliver my thoughts in a cohesive and a very clear manner. I consulted texts, I consulted papers, I spoke to some of my colleagues in journalism, and also some of my colleagues and fellow students in social media, in social justice cycles. And in the end, I found a classical work that was first published in 1991 by the late theorist and philosopher called Iris Marion Young on oppression. So I found this to be the best framework to use for this session about oppression, about social justice and journalism. So according to Young, there are 5 phases of oppression in our contemporary world. 5 phases of oppression. And these 5 phases of oppression, she says, are exploitation. That's number 1. Marginalization, powerlessness, cultural imperialism, and violence. So exploitation here, she refers to the act of using people's labor to produce profit while denying them adequate compensation. Marginalization, on the other hand, is the exclusion of a certain group from useful participation in society. Powerlessness here, she means lack of authority or power, often experienced by those not represented in decision-making, sessions and all that, and policies. Cultural imperialism involves the imposition of a dominant group's experiences and culture and establishing it as the norm. And violence here is the most obvious. So here it's a direct form of oppression involving physical harm or threats to those who violate or who are perceived to violate societal norms. So, yes, the question now is, what can journalism now do to counter and combat these 5 phases of oppression? What can journalism now do to counter exploitation? What can journalism now do to counter marginalization, powerlessness, cultural imperialism, and violence? So before answering this question, I also want to make it clear that I'm not implying that journalism itself has not fought this phase of oppression. I also want to make it clear here that I'm not also implying that journalism is the only institution that can fight these forms of oppression. However, my point is that there is room for more significant and continuous contributions from journalism in this regard. So let's now look first at marginalization. Marginalization. So exploitation is a project that started thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. The rich, the powerful, the privileged have historically exerted control over resources, labor, and capital, often to the detriment of less privileged classes. And through slavery, colonialism, industrial revolution, sexism, racism, exploitation has always been part of us. It has always been part of human history. In contemporary times, including here in Canada and also around the world, exploitation takes many forms, including wage theft, worker misclassification, exploitation of workers, and exploitation of migrant labor. It is seen in the global supply chains where workers in developing countries often labor under under poor conditions for minimal pay, contributing to products consumed here in wealthy nations. This modern form of exploitation is very complex. It is often intertwined with global economics and often hidden from the public eye. In fact, when we worked on our work on Panama Papers project, we highlighted how the rich and the powerful exploited financial systems at the expense of the public by exposing those who were dodging taxes and accumulating wealth through dubious means. This investigation, I mean here, the Panama Papers, underlined the role of journalism in revealing the mechanisms of exploitation. Now, what can journalism now do to counter exploitation? So journalism can play a crucial role in highlighting and investigating cases where individuals or groups are being used for profit without compensation. This involves in-depth reporting on labor issues, exposing exploitative practices in industries, and shedding light on the plight of workers who are underpaid and overworked. By bringing these stories to public attention, journalism can pressure companies and governments to enforce fair labor practices and to reform policies that enable exploitation. So a few years ago, most probably 2 years ago, I had the privilege of judging one of the American biggest international awards called the Overseas Press Club Awards. I remember coming across a submission by the Associated Press. In fact, to be honest, it's my favorite news organization. I remember coming across that submission. I remember coming across a submission called The Fruits of Labor. It was a series of stories, about 7 or 8 stories. This was a remarkable investigative project about exploitation and harsh conditions faced by workers in the palm oil industry in South Asia. The palm oil, as we all know, is a well sought out product used globally, including here in Canada, in a wide range of products, from food items, cosmetics to biofuels. The story revealed how laborers, including women, children, were subjected to various forms of abuse and exploitation, including wage theft, hazardous working conditions, and even instances of forced labor and human trafficking and sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and all that. So the project itself ran for the better part of 2021, and the Associated Press reporters highlighted the dire situation in the palm oil industry and brought international attention to the plight of these workers. They also sparked discussions about ethical sourcing and labor practices in global supply chains. Well, I still remember after finishing the story, I said to myself, this is what journalism should do. And I still remember saying this, and also saying this to my wife, that you see, this is the essence of journalism. This is what journalism should do. Journalism should really, fight for the oppressed. So to combat exploitation, journalism needs to aggressively combat these forms of exploitation, to uncover and bring to light these harsh realities. It needs to be on the side of the exploited. Now, let's move on to something else, marginalization. Young talks about marginalization. The marginalization project, just like the exploitation project, it's also historical. It has been around for many years. It's a phenomenon where certain groups are pushed to the margins of society, effectively excluding them from meaningful participation in social, economic, and political life. So this marginalization can be in form of various factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, class, and even geographic location. Throughout history, marginalized groups have often been denied access to resources, have been denied access to opportunities, sometimes, and in most cases, have been denied access to rights that are readily available to more dominant groups. Addressing marginalization requires journalism to focus on stories of those who who are often left out of the mainstream narratives. This means actively seeking to report on and from communities that are typically excluded from societal participation and representation. We often say, and it's a cliche now, we often say that journalists are the voice of the voiceless. But history has taught us, and some might differ with me here, but history has taught us that journalism is the voice of the powerful in some instances. In fact, there are studies that shows that the people, the masses, view journalists as the same way as they view politicians and all that. But again, to truly be the voice of the voiceless, journalism should shift its focus and resources to include underrepresented and marginalized groups. This involves not only reporting on their challenges and struggles, which is common, but also highlighting their resilience, also highlighting their achievements, also highlighting their contributions to the economy, to society, and all that. Some organizations are already doing that. Some organizations are taking the lead in this, but it may not be enough, but they are doing something. CBC News, for example, a few years ago launched Indigenous-focused content, specifically focusing on Indigenous content. It also launched Black-centered content under the title Being Black in Canada. So here's the deal. To combat marginalization, journalism should report on and from the marginalized communities. Now let's move on to powerlessness. Powerlessness, because Young also talks about powerlessness. Powerlessness as a concept speaks to the division in our society between those with power or those with dominance and those without, those who are completely without that. This manifests in various ways, impacting access to resources, decision-making processes, and the ability to influence change. Powerlessness often affects marginalized and exploited groups. In many instances, powerlessness is tied to socio-economic status, to class. It's tied to race, it's tied to gender, it's tied to ethnicity. But to combat powerlessness, journalism should aim to empower those who feel voiceless and powerless in our society. If you want to see how news media often perpetuate the state of powerlessness, just read stories on homelessness. While the news media is often ready to talk to homeless people about their personal experiences and challenges, taking pictures and videos, they often exclude them when it comes to decisions, to discussions about solutions. We don't see them. We don't see them when it comes to solutions in the media. So now, I think the question now is, what can journalism do to counter powerlessness? Journalism should strive to include voices of the powerless. A few years ago, when I was running a nonprofit investigative center in Africa, my team decided to spend days and days in a refugee camp in my home country of Botswana to talk to stateless refugees of war from the Democratic Republic of Congo who were facing deportation back to their country. So these were people without power. These were people without voice. Those were people who were very powerless and voiceless. They lived in a state of uncertainty and fear, and their stories were largely unheard and their plight invisible to the world. And again, even media organizations were not interested in their story. So through our journalism work, we gave them a platform to share their experiences, fears, and hopes. We recorded their testimonies. We captured the human face behind the refugee crisis. This was not just about also reporting about their struggles. It was about amplifying their voices in a way that could, invoke empathy, understanding from a global audience. In short, what we tried to do, and even then I didn't know that we were doing that, but what we did was that we empowered them. We gave them power to tell their stories. Former CBC journalist and professor at Carleton University, Duncan McHugh, advises journalists not to seek out indigenous voices in indigenous stories. He says journalists should consult indigenous people in all stories, whether it's stories about the economy, whether it's a story about politics, art, science, environment, and all that. So that voices should be heard. So the powerless, we have to, not only focus on their lived experiences, which I think is common. We have to really include them in in talks, in conversations about our country, about the economy, about everything. So in this case, journalism should empower the powerless in our society. So thirdly, Young also talks about cultural imperialism. So so cultural imperialism is where the dominant group's experiences and culture is accepted as common sense. Can I repeat this? Cultural imperialism is whereby the dominant group's experiences and culture is accepted as common sense and also as unquestioned norm. Historically, cultural imperialism has manifested through the imposition of the dominant culture over others, often through colonization, often through neo-colonization, often through globalization, often through cultural genocide. In tackling cultural imperialism, journalism needs to challenge the dominance of a single cultural narrative and also promote and report about Canada's multicultural ethos. I have 5 thoughts here of how journalism can combat cultural imperialism. 1, journalism should actively seek out and amplify voices from diverse cultural voices, especially those from marginalized or underrepresented communities. This helps to challenge the dominance of a singular cultural narrative. This is already happening in other organizations where you can see that there is a deliberate effort by news organizations to ensure that voices from cultural groups are amplified. 2, journalism should ensure that reporting is inclusive and respectful of different cultures. This includes being mindful of cultural sensitivities and avoiding stereotypes and generalizations. And 3, journalism should have a thorough understanding of cultural communities they are reporting about and all. That is a big problem. I remember one study said that most reporters do not have any clue about communities that are reporting on and about. So journalism should have a thorough understanding of cultural communities that are reporting about. 4, journalism can be used as a tool to educate audiences about different cultures, histories, viewpoints, worldviews, and all that. So this can foster great understanding and appreciation of cultural diversity. Number 5, journalism should actively challenge cultural stereotypes and cultural prejudices and should aim to question and to dismantle this hurtful narratives. So the idea is journalism should be in a position to dismantle these cultural narratives. Let's now move on to the last one, which is violence. According to Young, systemic violence refers to the use of physical force, harassment, intimidation, and even ridicule upon a certain group simply because they are a member of that group. So this concept of violence goes beyond just physical harm. It encompasses various forms of aggression and mistreatment that are deeply embedded in our societal structures and practices. I think I should make this thing clear, and most of you know this. Colonialism was a violent project. Slavery was a violent project. Sexism and patriarchy, in some cases, is a violent project. Violence was meted out in history against those who were colonized, those who were enslaved, in families, and it was meted to many people in multiple and devastating forms. The legacy of violence is not something that is in the past. It's still even with us today. And violence has, it's my argument that it has morphed into a systemic and structural way. This includes institutional racism, socioeconomic disparities, and other ongoing types of oppression and suppression and all that. Other groups today continue to experience forms of systemic violence and marginalization. This is evident in the treatment of refugees, it's evident in the treatment of immigrants, it's evident in the treatment of religious minorities, gender and sexual minorities, and also people with disabilities. The question is, what can now journalism do to combat or to fight this violence? In addressing violence, especially the kind that stems from oppression, journalism must report responsibly and sensitively on incidents of violence. This includes not just reporting the events, which is common, but also exploring the underlying societal and systemic issues that enables such violence. Journalism should aim to provide a platform for the voices of victims and survivors, while also investigating and exposing the root causes of violence, whether they be institutional, cultural, religious, or political. I think the story of the week now today, one of the stories of the week, it's about the hockey scandal. So the Globe and Mail ran a series on the Hockey Canada, and also about the cultural silence surrounding sexual assault allegations within the organization. So when I read the story since last year, and in my mind I was like, well, this is a story that exemplifies how journalism can play a crucial role in addressing systemic violence in our institutions. A few years ago, the CBC News also launched a comprehensive investigation into cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, basically also challenging the violence and systemic injustice faced by Indigenous women and girls in Canada. So in combating violence, journalism should advocate for peace. You know, I sometimes struggle when I go through X or Twitter or Facebook, when I see journalists failing to advocate for peace. So I think, you know, as journalists, as people who care about social justice, journalism should advocate for peace. Peace within our communities, peace within our country, peace within families, peace within institutions, peace within, within the country, peace around the world. So I want to say in conclusion that there are many ideas out there of what journalism can do to promote social justice and fight oppression. There are many ideas there. So my focus today was only on the 5 phases of oppression and how journalism can fight oppression. I want to also say that, to conclude by saying that oppression it's a complex and pervasive issue, but journalism has the potential to be a powerful force for change by reporting responsibly, amplifying marginalized voices, exposing justice, advocating for peace, and promoting dialogue and understanding. Journalism can also contribute significantly to the ongoing struggle for a more just and equitable society. Well, let me end by quoting an American Nigerian author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she says, and I quote, "Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity." End quote. I want to end by saying, yes, journalism itself has done harm to the public, to the world in the past, but it can be used to empower, it can be used to humanize, it can also be used to repair the broken world. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alvin. And yes, I would like to unmute ourselves, and if we could please give Alvin a round of applause for his words.
Thanks, Alvin.
Thank you so much, Alvin. And just before I turn the floor over to first-year journalism student Megan Foster, who is going to moderate our question and answer period, I would like to just let you know, Alvin, as I mentioned, is a full-time faculty member in DC's journalism program and this year's Journalism and Creative Writing Writer in Residence. So if you're not aware, the Chronicle is produced by the journalism program, celebrating 50 years of connecting campus and community. And Alvin's words here are being reflected in the work that is being produced in the newsroom that you can kind of see in the pictures here. So I just want to put that in the chat. And then I'm going to hand the floor over to Megan Foster and invite questions and answers. Over to you, Megan.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much, Alvin, for your talk. I found it was really interesting. To me, as a journalism student, especially, I thought you had a bunch of really clear advice on how we can use journalism to fight for social justice. So I guess my first question was, how should social justice principles be incorporated into journalism education? And what measures should journalism programs take to make sure that students feel well equipped to tackle these issues when reporting?
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. Thank you so much for your question. I think it's very critical to embed social justice principles into the journalism curriculum. In fact, I think this is also happening in other journalism schools and programs around Canada. For example, if you look at Carleton University is offering courses like journalism and Indigenous people, how to report on Indigenous stories, and also courses like history of Black journalism in Canada, journalism and belonging, and many others. So I think there's something that has been done, but I don't think it's enough. But I also think one thing, just to answer your question, is that journalism education should include perspective from diverse cultural and socio-economic and racial backgrounds. It's happening in some some institutions, but I think more can still be done. One thing that I always found to be quite interesting, and it's something called interdisciplinary learning and collaboration. And I came across this through my master's program, where as a journalism student, you are asked to take courses away from journalism itself. And I think that's very, very important because it helps journalism students to really understand issues around them. I'm not talking about gen eds. I'm talking about journalist students or journalism students taking courses in sociology, for example, in political science, history courses and all that, so that they understand what's happening around them. So this idea, and I think it's also happening at TMU, where you have journalists with being required to take such courses to say, you know what, of course we're going to teach you how to write, we're going to teach you about ethics, we're going to teach you about this and that, but you have to take 3 or 4 courses in political science and or sociology and all that. Yeah. So also this will help the students to to have a better comprehension of social justice issues. The other thing is, I think journalism schools have a role to help journalism students, some who are coming from high schools, to discover their biases. We are human beings, we are all biased. I have my own biases, but I think there should be a deliberate effort to help journalism students quite early to discover their biases and deal with them. And other stuff could be, to diversify faculty, which is already happening in most cases, diversify, students' population, students who are entering into journalism schools and programs and all that. Yeah, I don't know if I've fully answered your question.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you. And you spoke a lot in your talk about the idea that journalists should be on the side of oppressed people. So how can journalists maintain objectivity in their reporting while also advocating for social justice?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a very, very good question. Well, I'm not a big fan of the principle of objectivity. Let's start from that angle. I'm not a big fan of the principle of objectivity or the principle of hard objectivity. I'm more inclined to a sort of innovation of objectivity. And this is why. I think, objectivity in journalism has been the biggest enabler of oppression. Let me repeat this. I think objectivity itself as a principle has been the biggest enabler of oppression. Because in most cases, it presents a false equivalence between the oppressor on the other side and the oppressed on the other side. So I'm currently looking at news articles on lynching. So this method of really of publicly killing or murdering or executing Black people, in particular Black men in the US. And I've been looking at stuff that happened between 1930 and 1945, after the end of the Second World War. So in most cases, when you look at the stories that were objectively written by journalists, you find a situation whereby a reporter will go and interview, parents or relatives or friends of the person who was lynched by members of the KKK. And from there, they'll go and interview members of the person. They'll interview members of the KKK, the accused, and sometimes they'll interview the police. And after that, they'll come and write, an objective story. But do you think that would be an objective story? So what I found in most cases that most of the stories, will not help you, will not point you to the truth. Most of the stories lack the truth. They are devoid of any element of truth in them because they are trying to balance the story. So basically, for me, objectivity, as it is, it has been the biggest enabler of oppression. And the other thing about objectivity is that it can be, and allow me to use this word, it can be torturous and distressing and challenging to journalists of color, because sometimes they are even forced to be disinterested, to be detached from reality when covering issues that affect their communities and all that. So in my view, I think hard objectivity it's problematic to me. Yeah. So the other thing that I think is very important is that most organizations I also have found that this is not working. Most organizations have dropped this idea of objectivity. And I want to challenge you, even journalism students here, to check the code of ethics of most of news organizations in Canada and the US. You'll find that the principle doesn't exist in their codes of ethics. The focus now is it's on truthfulness. The focus now is on fairness. The focus now is on transparency. How did I get to this story? So I think instead of really focusing much on objectivity or on hard objectivity or strong objectivity, we should now focus on pursuing the truth. If we're going to be biased, and I always say this to some of my students, that if we're going to be biased as journalists, we should be biased towards the truth. We should have commitment. In fact, we should be committed to the truth and point to the truth. Yeah,
that's a really interesting perspective to hear. I think you really put it clearly for me when you said in your talk that oppression is a fact, it exists even if we don't all see it. So I think that's really interesting to hear. And my last question before I turn it over to people in the audience. So some of the attendees here might not be journalists or journalism students. So what can the public do to support journalism to address the issues of social justice?
Yeah, I think one of the simplest and yet most effective ways to support journalism is to stay informed, is to consume the news, is to read what people are, what we are writing, what journalists are writing out there. That's the most basic thing that you can do to support journalism. In most cases, sometimes the other thing is you may also want to consider subscribing, to news organizations that you think promote social justice, and supporting them financially if it's possible. We have non-profit organizations that support investigative journalism, non-profit news organizations that do amazing stuff. So if you want to do that, support that. The other thing that I also think is very, very important is to approach journalists with story tips. If you come across wrongdoing in your institution, if you come across wrongdoing in your society, approach a journalist that you trust. Approach them and really, tell them your story. Talk to them about what's happening. Allow them to investigate the stories and report. Yeah. I don't know if I've fully answered that.
Yeah, great. Thank you again so much for your talk and for answering those questions. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, Michael, hand up.
Sure. My name is Michael Christensen. Thanks for the talk, Alvin. It's been great. I grew up with traditional media. There wasn't the internet. So there wasn't a lot of choices as far as what journalism you pursued. Most of it was just news with opinion journalism, as far as I can remember. I thought the advent of the internet would be a boon to journalism, but I'm finding more and more anecdotally, of course, I have no statistics to back this up, that it's actually causing a greater rift and it's cloistering people together. And I was surprised that that's the way it went, or maybe I wasn't. We are human. But what do we do to tackle that problem where it seems like journalism is being pushed even further out now with the internet as opposed to coming together? Thank you.
That's a very good question, because to be honest, this is what I see also. The world is more polarized because of the internet. But again, internet, it offered democracy, democratized the space itself to allow more voices and all that. But what can be done now? It's very, I don't think I have the best answer for that. But what I can also think, what I also think should be done is to ensure that the real journalism itself, does the job well. It's to ensure that we educate the public about, the dangers of misinformation and all that. I think it's our responsibility. It's also to say, you know what, there are stuff there that is not journalism. To say that when you watch a Fox News, MSNBC, don't think that's journalism. That's opinion. That's entertainment. And I think we have to be clear with that. We have to, put ourselves as the media, as journalism, in a position where we educate the public about what is real journalism, because it's missing. Everyone can wake up today and say they are journalists, but are they really following the methods of really writing a story, of gathering data, information, and putting the story together? Most of them are not, but we have to really, find a way of really informing the public of what is journalism all about. What are the principles of journalism and all that? I don't know if I'm answering your question. It's not an easy question to answer, but I agree we are more polarized than, say, 10 years ago, say 20 years ago. We hate each other more, if I may use this word.
No, that more or less points out what I was talking about. It's just I think we're better off now, but people have to be more discerning in what they access. And I think that's where sort of the education system is kind of lacking. We need to catch up, because to the best of my knowledge, I've been in school for a while until I joined DC. That's not taught. Like, you're not taught that. You're taught to be a journalist. You're taught how to be a journalist. You may be taught a lot of things about journalism, but nobody's being really taught how to access journalism in a responsible way.
Yeah, so I agree. I spent time in I always talk about this story. I spent time in Norway, some few months in Norway, and we visited some elementary schools and high schools. I was so shocked and surprised about their curriculum when it comes to media literacy. It was so rich. You will have a situation whereby from kindergarten until grade 12, you have a media studies course that helps students to discern, to know what is news and what is not news, and all that. And also, and I think this is working, because if you look at the Reuters Institute report last year on trust in the media, most Norway ranks above most countries, including even in the West, because the people that trust the media, if they hear something, if they read something in the newspaper or in the news sites that are trusted, they believe it, and they don't have any problem with trusting the media. And I think this is a fundamental issue that should go to, that should start in basic education and all that. The fact that we talk about media literacy much later, and the fact that our schools, they have something called media literacy within the English and department and all that, is not enough. I have a daughter who's in grade 4 now, and the other time she came and we talked about issues of media literacy, and the stuff that learning about media literacy, it's really not media literacy, it's something else. So I think there should be a deliberate effort by the provincial government, by the national government, to ensure that kids as early as 5, as 4 are taught how to discern, how to read the news, how to analyze the news.
But I just wanted to point out, Alvin, I've put something in the chat just for Michael and or anybody else. It is News Literacy Week this week, and there will be at 1 o'clock in the library a presentation speaking partly to the question you've asked, Michael. And I put a link to News Literacy Week there.
Well, that's a happy coincidence. Thank you.
Yeah. So I believe that there is a question from the newsroom, and I think that might be our last question. And Megan, sorry to jump in there.
Just one quick thing before I throw to that student, Alvin, just building on what you just said. Yesterday, there was Rick Westhead, who is the journalist who broke the story of the allegations of sexual assault against the hockey players. He posted something on Twitter in which he said, "Everyone today is scrambling to find a legitimate, credible news source. Why don't you pay for journalism?" And I thought that was really a profound statement to make. So Clayton has a quick question. Clayton, feel free to come forward.
Hey there, Alvin. So I do have a question. So I'm Clayton Domain. When you're talking about cultural imperialism, what do you think is the dominant group right now in Canada? And has that changed over the last 100 years?
I didn't want to go there, really. But you see, the idea of the dominant group in Canada, it's well known. I don't have to say anything. I think the dominant white group, it has been dominant for some time, and the thinking, the policies, and all that, in most cases, promoted the white dominance. But obviously, things have changed. It's not like 100 years ago. Things have changed. There have been policies that have been enacted over time, and things are changing. Because really, as we all know, Canada is a multicultural society, and the whole idea is to attain that. But that does not say that the dominance the white dominance is gone. It's still there in one way or the other. I don't know if
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying I don't know if I've fully answered your question.
Well, I just have a follow-up. Like, is it just in terms of like the ethnic or the skin color group, or is there like a dominant, do you think like a dominant group can manifest as like an like ideology?
Well, I
For
think
example.
dominance it manifests itself in so many ways. It's ideology, it's it's ideas, white ideas, dominant groups ideas, and all that. It can manifest in so many ways, and yeah. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, I had a couple of other questions, but I'll thank you very much for your time.
You
Thanks.
can ask them in class. I'm fine.
Yeah.
So
Anyone
just
else?
in the interest of time, we're at 11:01, but I think maybe we can do one more question and we'll just go to about 11:05. So please go ahead,
Right.
newsroom.
Hi, Alvin. My name is Brandon Rushton, and at the beginning, you show this kind of collage of these words that kind of represent you. And I noticed you used the word privileged, and you also talked a lot about oppression, and we were talking about how that manifests. And I was wondering, in your own personal career, what specifically can you recall that? Just trying to figure out how I want to word this. I guess how do you think your background has affected your ability to tell the news, and do you think it's been beneficial to you in how you tell the news and all aspects of news reporting?
I don't know if I get the question, but talking about privilege, I consider myself privileged. In so many ways. I'm male. I'm heterosexual, and I've enjoyed. I mean, my life has been shaped by heteronormativity. This is what has been the story of my life. But obviously, I'm a human being. Like I said, I'm Black. I'm African, and when I approached my stories when I was in Botswana, I didn't think about, when I was in Africa, I didn't think about, race, for example, because I come from a country where about 80% or 85% of the people are Black. And in most cases, what concerned me was issues of class. How are the poor represented in the media? What concerned me was issues of women empowerment. How are women portrayed and represented in the media? How are we reporting on stories about women? Are we doing a good job in portraying women? I was also concerned about issues to do with corruption. How do we hold the government to account? How do we ensure that the stealing and the corrupt officials go to jail for what they do? That was really my main focus. But when coming to Canada, well, I came here not as a reporter anymore, but my identity and my skin color became more pronounced immediately when I landed at the border, at the airport. So it became something that now I also want to think about this, to say, how are people who look like me represented and presented in the media? How are they reported on? And to find out this, and also how are disabled people, portrayed in the media and all that. When I came to DC, I was pursuing my doctoral studies in media studies. But because there were so many issues in my life, in the world that I live in, that I wanted to address, I shifted to social justice to continue, to find answers to these questions. Social justice, specifically social justice, and also about how journalism itself can be a main player in social justice. And for a year or so, this is what I've been trying to do, to find ways in which social justice, in which journalism can promote social justice. So I don't know if I've answered my question. I know I'm all over the place, but yeah. Yeah.
No, that was great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Megan, would you like to wrap up the session?
So one more thing, if you
Sorry,
guys,
go ahead.
yeah. So one more thing, if you guys need to have a conversation with me about anything about today's talk about journalism and social justice, about investigative journalism, about race and journalism, disability. It's one of my passions now, and class and gender issues. And you know, I'm happy to have that conversation. And you can reach me in this email.
Thank you again, Alvin, for your talk. I think you brought up some really great ideas that all of us will hopefully take forward with us as we continue as journalism students. Thank you to everyone for asking questions. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And the link to the survey is in the chat. Thank you for going overtime. And my greatest thanks to you, Alvin, for your talk, and Megan for monitoring the Q&A. I hope everybody has a great day. Bye for now.